slain. stats until they respawn. Mordekaiser banishes a single enemy champion to the Death Realm for a gruesome 1v1. If he destroys them, he'll consume their soul, gaining partial stats until they respawn. As a brutal warlord of death, Mordekaiser outplays opponents by turning fights when the odds are against him, punish enemies in the Death Realm, and return to obliterate the rest.
United States would like to exert influence over smaller nations in its own neighborhood. Would that have precipitated an invasion? I don't think so, because military power is military expansion is met with military expansion. Economic expansion is met with economic expansion in retaliatory scenarios.
I guess your points would be more salient if Russia wasn't already engaging or having been engaged for decades in aggressive military expansion or just general fuckery around its borders. So we have the invasion of Georgia, we get a puppet state in Transnistria, we have the annexation of Crimea and the war in Donbass. Also, like there's adventures also in Syria by Vladimir Putin. So Russia is a country that very clearly is not interested in peaceful coexistence with at least with its former satellite states, right? So and I guarantee you, if the Baltics weren't in NATO, Russia would have done they would have done a fucking Donbass in the Baltics. Putin is a far-right leader. He's an imperialist, of course. He's sort of drunk on this Russian imperial ambitions of the past. And if you don't think that, just from a realist perspective, that he would try to restore the former glory of his geopolitical pole, any chance he would get, then if you don't believe that, I don't know what to tell you. And then NATO is there precisely to stop this from happening, to stop Russian imperial ambitions from manifesting itself as they did in Moldavia, Ukraine, and Georgia. So I don't know where you're getting this from. That like Russia is after peaceful coexistence in Europe, which is clearly not the case.
Yeah. Also, just to back on, and then you're going to answer. Just to add on to the end of Adam's statement. So I do agree that we can't really make historical counterfactuals. Like we can't see what would have happened otherwise. But like when we look at why did Russia initially invade Ukraine in 2014, it wasn't because of NATO expansionism, and it wasn't because of the West. It was because of the ousting of Yanukovych. Right? That was like the Crimean Peninsula was taken as a response to that. So like, are we really saying that, were there no NATO expansion ideas on the table? Like, would that invasion have not happened? I find that really hard to believe. I think that militarily, I think Sevastopol and the Black Sea is really important to Russia, and I think they wanted to take that peninsula, and they saw an opportunity to do so. I don't think that NATO expansion has had anything to do with it.
Well, they had a deal with the Ukrainians. The Crimean Peninsula, well, the Sebastopol base was on lease. They were allowed to have up to like 25,000 troops there. They had 16,000 at the time. And when the coup occurred, the Ukrainian forces, including 3 former presidents, advocated that the Russians be evicted violently from that base. So Putin ordered his men to walk out of their bases and seize the Crimean Peninsula, which they did without bloodshed.
What is
Okay,
the choice
and
for that?
again,
Wait,
your point-
that
wait.
Russians were to be violently evicted from the Crimean Peninsula? I never remember
Yes.
any of this happening. What is the? I don't like to do like the source and debates, but I'm almost certain that that's not true.
All right, give me a moment.
Yeah, no problem.
But actually, even if that did happen, which I don't know if it did, but if we entertain that it did happen, then why didn't Russian soldiers just like protect their own bases? If they want to evict them from the bases, then let them stay in the bases. Plus, at that point, the Ukrainian military was like they had 3,000 deployable troops, right? And Russia knew this, of course. This was a result of decades of systemic rot. Like, what could Ukraine even do against 16,000 Russian troops, like heavily armed, well supplied Russian troops in Crimea? Nothing. So the fact that Russians actually came out of their military bases and took over Ukrainian government buildings in Crimea is, it's at that point the opposition to them supposedly about to be evicted from their bases is not really the reason there, right? Like it seems like they just like really wanted to get back that historic part of their empire.
Again, this is the Crimea is kind of counterfactual that we're looking for. Russia has a prime opportunity to basically annex Ukraine in 2014 if they wanted to. As Adam something just pointed out correctly, the Ukrainian military was in no place to pose any kind of substantial resistance to the Russian army back in 2014. And so why, if they're so hell-bent on imperialistic ambitions, on rebooting the Soviet Union, on whatever Adam something's afraid of, why didn't they just annex the entire country of Ukraine then and there?
Thing is, they tried.
And
they tried.
the answer to that is they didn't try. The answer to that is that they did not go that far. There was a Western-sponsored coup in Kiev in 2014, and Russia proportionally responded by seizing Crimea because the new regime in Kiev was putting their military bases and their presence in the Black Sea was threatening that. So they did not try to annex Crimea. Adams something will most likely point to the Donbass and Lugansk wars that started in 2014, the separatist wars there. Russia did support those militarily, much like the United States supported the Chechen War in the 90s against Russia. And I'm again not justifying that, but just in a realpolitik sense, they were destabilizing what they saw as what was becoming a hostile government to them. And in 2015, when the Donbass and Lugansk republics asked to be annexed into Russia, Russia denied them that. If Russia was on such a path of imperialist expansion, why didn't they take over the Ukraine in 2014? Why didn't they annex the DNR and the LNR in 2015?
If I can make one really quick request for Adam, I'll let you. I'm not even going to respond to that. This is a really quick request. If we could, for this conversation, just because I'm a child, if we could go like back and forth on like 1 or 2 points each, that would be so nice. Instead of laying out so much contestable stuff, is what I would say. I would appreciate it. But go ahead, Adam. Go.
All right, so the questions are like, why didn't if Russia's imperial ambitions really are like sort of really are the reality, then why didn't Russia
saying
annex
so much
Ukraine,
shit that's just
why
so
didn't
fucking
Russia
dumb.
Annex Donbass, Donetsk and Luhansk? So the first question, why didn't Russia annex Ukraine? Well, they were actually counting with the Ukrainian state collapsing under even the slightest duress, because it really didn't. It wasn't obvious back then that the Ukrainian state will survive, and Russia was 100% banking on the fact that the government will just collapse, and then they'll just do the Donbass treatment to the whole country, little people's republics here and there, and then the entire thing just falls back to Russia eventually. But oopsie daisy, they accidentally created a Ukrainian national identity in the process, which has been suppressed for decades by Soviets. So the Donbass area is actually Plan C. Plan A was the whole of Ukraine, and then that wasn't going to work. Plan B was the so-called Novorossiya project that's from Transnistria all the way to the southwest Odessa, Crimea, and then all the way to Mariupol, Donbass, and maybe Kharkiv even. Actually, Kharkiv as well. That was Plan B, but in Kharkiv, only the east remained, so that was Plan C. And the reason, at that point, the reason why they didn't annex the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics is because it was more geopolitically, from a political perspective, it was far more efficacious for Putin to not annex these territories, to use them as these sort of forward bases to destabilize Ukraine and to keep this sort of questionable contested buffer zone, to eventually try and sort of exert their influence. Back then, federalization was the name of the game. Putin tried to achieve a sort of settlement where the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics will become part of Ukraine in a federation, where the Donetsk and Luhansk regions have a veto in Ukraine's foreign policy. So as you can see, that would have given Russia essentially control over Ukraine's geopolitical course. So that was the name of the game. This is realpolitik. That's my answer.
Okay, so I just gave. Oh, go ahead, Justice.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so I just dropped in the article from the Kiev Post, and there's others too, where they call to mobilize forces and to break the Kharkiv Pact, which has that lease I was talking about, and to intervene. Now, the issue with the Donbass, of course, is you have, because of the history of the country, you have hundreds of thousands of Russian civilians living in the region. And as Justice said, after they declared their independence, Russia did not invade. They sent in deniable clandestine forces to help them maintain their autonomy. And there were attacks on the Donbass. A war was launched, and as I said, 14,000 people were killed. And in the meantime, the U.S. government, after overthrowing the government in Kiev, after Yanukovych decided not to take the EU association agreement, there was support for that war, political and otherwise. And once Trump came into office, he started arming the country. And since then, it's become a major security risk for the people in that region, and it's also right on the border of Russia. I'm not condoning any kind of violence, but if this occurred in the United States, say in Mexico, if Russia had, overthrown the government and launched supported a war against, populations there of, Americans on the border, and they were preparing for, a war with, or even talking about going in there and just evicting those people and killing them and reconstituting an ethnic Ukraine, that would be something that the Americans would object to, because it would be a major violation of their security. But of course, we're sort of starting at the wrong point. I think that it's important to look at the past and see how this led up. I mean, again, you mentioned Georgia. Now, unfortunately, the issue is that the war occurred after Georgia was promised a Ukrainian membership by George W. Bush against the wishes of Paris and Berlin. And the Georgians were given military support, and it's come out in reports that they were receiving back-channel assurances from people in Dick Cheney's orbit, and they thought that they could count on American support. And as Justice pointed out, Sergei Lavrov had already told William Burns that this was a major red line, and Burns had told Condoleezza Rice that no Russian politician, conservative or liberal, and everybody in the foreign policy establishment there, from Putin's sharpest liberal critics to the worst most backwards knuckle draggers in the dark recesses of the Kremlin, I think it's basically what he says, would ever accept this. And they were concerned in Ukraine, for instance, that a civil war would break out in the event that the government tried to join NATO. And unfortunately, this is what has been promised, and successive regimes have attempted to do just this. And again, it's in the backdrop of the war against the ethnic Russians.
But why would a civil war break out over NATO membership in Ukraine?
Because the country is largely divided. They're in the Russian-speaking regions in the south and the east. These people were threatened by ultranationalist forces who supported the EU membership and also have been trying to join NATO this whole time. If you look at people like Zelensky, I mean, one of the big problems was they never gave up the promise, even when there were negotiations that could have removed that as an obstacle to peace, and they never implemented the Minsk II agreements that the the Russians and the Germans and the French and the Ukrainians agreed to.
Okay, wait,
and-
just quickly.
so much
So yes. So just with regards to your previous point, if there was a civil war in Ukraine, if there was back then a civil war due to the country's NATO membership, who would start that civil war against whom?
Well, again, the ethnic Russians are being attacked. This country has been used as a way to invade Moscow by Western
So the
powers for
Ukrainian,
hundreds
the
of years.
Ukrainian ultranationalists would start a civil war against the ethnic Russians in Ukraine if Ukraine joined NATO in 2014 or earlier.
No, they already did.
Just
I'm
let me
saying
jump-
that it
let me
was a
jump
threat
in.
to Russia's security.
Okay, but
Connor, just let me jump-
how's NATO?
Just let me jump in.
is doing?
Yeah, just let me jump in right here. I think that the what Connor is quoting is a section from the Yet Means Net memoir that was written by William Burns in 2008, where he said that he assessed that might be a potential outcome. I'm not necessarily gonna stand here and defend that. It may or may not have turned out that way, and it's hard to understand what the then ambassador, the U.S. ambassador to Russia, thought was a potential outcome with all the resources at his disposal at that time. To relegate that at this moment, who knows? I mean, what they were
Yeah, I
thinking
think-
about, what he was focusing on then.
I think it's also weird that like there's so much like hypothetical stuff from Ukraine that we talk about to justify Russian aggression, but then we can't look at like actual Russian aggression. So I was curious what you mentioned about like you said that 3 former like Ukrainian prime ministers came out to denounce the Kharkiv Pact or the Kharkiv Pact or whatever. Like, yeah, 3 leaders came out and said it'd be a good idea to do it, but when they tried this in 2013, it got shot down in the Ukrainian parliament. I read the thing that you linked. So this wasn't on the table that Ukraine was ever going to go down and retake Sevastopol and kick Russia out, and they weren't going to renew the peace of the base. The idea that was a fear because there was an article published that some people were saying they should do it by 3 people that don't attack on parliament anymore in the Verkhovna Rada or whatever. Like that's just unfounded, right? Like imagine that justification of invading a country because a year ago a piece of legislation to not renew the base got shot down. It doesn't make any sense. I feel like you have to do a lot of mental gymnastics to try to figure out like, well, maybe they invaded because of this or that or that. Like we know exactly why the Crimean Peninsula was taken, and it was because Yanukovych left, and it was because Russia was losing control of Ukraine. Like that's a very easy like that's like 3 steps from A to B to see exactly what happened.
Absolutely. The new government in Ukraine in 2014 was fielding questions of fielding ideas of not extending the leases for the bases and also evicting the Russians. Not in 13, but in 2014.
Sure, but
So
would that
again,
justify?
under
Let's
the
say
new,
that
under the new administration,
he's gonna
was
rant
it-
for like 20 minutes, dude. I hate the rant.
Really
It's
quick,
so fucking
jump
annoying.
back.
Oh
on
god,
to
you can never have a
Adam's
debate.
point.
It's just like how long
He
can you
says,
schizo out
let's
like your
look
50
at,
fucking points?
realpolitik in Ukraine about how things could have possibly played out, and then he says Russia absolutely did want to take Ukraine. They were waiting for the Ukraine to fall apart. That's an interesting story that has no basis in reality or
That's what they just did.
We have no
2 months ago.
ability to prove that. You're saying this is what was in the heads of Putin or in the heads of the Russian.
Oh, sure. I
high
mean,
command.
on
We have
the
no way to
24th
prove
of
that.
February, they tried exactly this again, but with actual military forces directly. Like, I'm sorry. Have you heard the
All right,
news? Like,
but
Russia invaded Ukraine.
24th of February 2022 is not 2014. It's a different time span. It's a different.
Yes.
it's
Back
a
then,
whole
Russia tried to
different-
cross.
a whole different scenario. But just really quick. Let's, instead of looking at some sort of ethereal theoretics, let's look at the reality of the situation. Based on the Russians and Americans, or the Western play in this thing, as the United States-led Western world follows a policy of encircling Russia with active military bases. Russia works a little bit in territories on its border, and who's the aggressor here? Who's expanding military operations?
What is
Who?
the NATO aggression?
That is the question, and that's the theory. That's the thing that we have to look at.
What is the NATO
Countries-
aggression? Like I'm curious. Let's play that thought experiment real quick. What do we think is going to happen?
All right, Destiny. When was the one time in the NATO history when Article 5 was enacted? One time.
We triggered Article 5 for 9/11. What do you mean?
We triggered Article 5 for 9/11 to invade where? Afghanistan. Halfway around the world, completely out of our sphere of influence, potentially a war that we didn't need to have fought.
Hold on, I'm sorry.
So
do you think they're
as
triggering?
Russia
Hold on.
sees NATO
Wait. No, wait. Can we just one point by point, okay? Are you trying to say that Russia might 9/11 us and we're for Article 5 for that? Or are you trying to say that another country might 9/11 us and we're going to Article 5 into Russia? Do you really believe that's a possibility?
I'm saying that as the United States, as the Western world says, NATO is simply a protective, defensive alliance. It doesn't look like that from the other side.
We don't
It
have to.
looks
Work,
like
I mean, we
you
can look
find
at NATO
reasons
missions
and
to
you
do
do
this. Wait, let's engage with the point. I want to hear this. I want to hear the engagement with this point. Do you really think? Do you personally? Do you believe that there is any chance that NATO or NATO forces or NATO countries are going to be attacking Russia? That an Article 5 trigger is going
Look,
to.
do you think?
Are you literally? You
so
won't engage
there
with
was
this
the interview-
because it destroys the entire argument. You know that will never happen.
I will absolutely engage with this. I will absolutely engage
Okay.
with it. No
So
problem.
will NATO invade
Oliver
Russia,
Stone
yes or no?
has an interview, has his famous, multi-hour interviews with Putin, where he brings up this exact point. Mr. Putin, don't you know that NATO is just a jobs program for the West? For the most part, it's just corporate welfare. This is never going to be used to attack Russia. Don't you understand that? And Putin says, it may be that way, it may be not that way, but if you're looking at it from our side, as country after country gets integrated into the NATO system, as rocket launchers get placed, as military bases get moved closer and closer to our border, we have to look at this, again, in a realpolitik sort of way. Put it on the other side. What if it wasn't the economic system of the Soviet Union, but the economic system of the Western world that collapsed in 1991. And that the Warsaw Pact was integrating Canada and Mexico and putting military bases on the United States border. Would the United States, with the Monroe Doctrine in place, ever tolerate that?
Why? There is no
Sure,
answer.
so
But
that's
wait,
what
I
we
want to.
engage with.
Anna, you can do this, but I have to repeat the question one more time because
Sure,
you'll
sure.
never get an answer from this. Do we really think that there is a future where NATO countries? We already have nukes in Turkey. We already have the 3 countries up in the Baltics. Like, is Ukraine going to be? That's the domino that we invade Moscow through. Like, is that really a thing you think is going to happen? That Russia is going to be invaded by a NATO country? Why are you just saying random stuff? In 2000, I don't care. I'm just curious. Do you think that NATO or any NATO country will actually invade Russia? I don't want to quote or a news post. What is it?
In 2008, Russia said very clearly that the Ukraine and Georgia were red lines. Just like any country has to have its things that it's willing to tolerate and not willing to tolerate, like for the United States, weapons of mass destruction in Iraq or whatever. There have to be things that they will say are, tolerable or intolerable. And
Sure, but do you think NATO would
participation
invade
is
Russia?
intolerable.
Do you think NATO would invade Russia?
Do I think Do I think NATO would invade Russia?
Yes, it's a yes or no question. We're asking for a 6th time.
The answer is obviously
In the
no.
current
Like, we
political
literally have,
environment? Of course
not,
we've
of
got a
course not.
phone set up between
So
Washington
why
and the
are they
Kremlin. Like,
expanding all the way up to Russia's borders? Why are they doing
because
drills
when
with
you're not,
flags?
because
Great
for
question.
the
Why are
go
they
Adam,
lifting
go
up
Adam.
arms?
Okay.
and
Wait,
pointing-
wait,
Why
give
would
us-
they do that?
wait,
Why would
okay.
they put
What
dual
a
use
great
missiles
what a great
in Romania
question.
and Poland?
What
Why
a
are
great
they
question,
doing the
Connor.
largest
Let
military
me answer
exercise since
I would-
the Cold War all
I
throughout
would
Eastern
love to
Europe,
answer
including on
I would
Russia's
love to
borders?
answer that.
Why
I would
are
love
they
to answer
sanctioning
that.
Russia?
I would love
Why
to
are they
answer that.
saying that they're happy
I
with
would love to answer that.
Ukrainians dying?
Okay. Please, both. Thank you, both of you.
Okay.
Stop for a second. Okay.
Adam is
Wait. Okay.
I
Okay.
love answering.
Okay.
And
So,
it's not like
give me
America
ga-
doesn't launch aggressive.
Is my mic not on? Can nobody hear me? Okay. Sorry.
Prepare
I
yourself for that possibility.
Okay. Wait. Can anyone? Is my mic actually not working? I can't tell if it is or not.
It's working. I'm just playing
Okay,
whack-a-mole.
Okay, it is working. I just couldn't tell. Okay, so you guys were talking over each other, so I and nobody heard anything. Okay, so this is what I'm gonna do. I'm just gonna have Adam quickly ask the question, then have Connor respond, and neither of you talk over the other. Adam, if you think he's not answering the question, you can just repeat it right after he finishes answering. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay, Adam, what is the question?
I was about to actually answer the question. Connor asked the question.
Oh, Connor asked the question. Okay, Connor, then can you ask the question?
But short, in the short
Okay.
form. He's muted.
Okay.
Oh shit. Okay.
So why does NATO expand or something like that? That was the question.
Yeah, why are they ripping up arms treaties? Why are they constantly doing massive drills and Russia's near abroad? Why did
Okay,
they
sure.
unilaterally and in violation of international law attack Kosovo? And why are they promising Georgia and Ukraine NATO membership when they know that that could cause a war because the Russians have said that it would be a direct threat to their security and they would be forced to decide whether to intervene, particularly in Ukraine. Ukraine has been invaded by Western powers several times, including by the Nazis. So why is the because they were promised that NATO wouldn't expand. So why would you have to explain why they would break that promise?
Okay, so your original question was that why does NATO keep expanding around Russia and of course. So if you look at this one from a realpolitik perspective, of course, why does Russia invade all these other neighboring countries around it, right? There's not much peace, it seems, in the former imperial sphere. And so it makes perfect sense that countries would democratically vote to join a defensive alliance again while neighboring an aggressive imperialist power such as Russia. And dude, there's Georgia, there's Transnistria, there's Ukraine. Shit gets fucked up around Russia. Everyone can see. I would say people with the IQ of a room temperature can see this, right? So if you're a voter and if you're like, should I join NATO or not? So we have this neighbor, Russia. He keeps fucking invading its former subjects in fact to subjugate them again. I don't know. Should we join NATO? I guess we kind of should. That's the response, right? That's why people voted in all this to join NATO. And if Russia perceives this as a threat, by the way, it's Russia's problem.
I also want to add on to Adam. I want to add on real quick to Adam too, because this question gets floated a lot. This idea that what if Russia were to start bases around Mexico? Or what if Russia were to create bases inside Canada or Cuba and they would start doing this? That would be pretty egregious, I admit. What if the United States were to try to recognize independent regions in Mexico or Canada and send fucking troops into those countries to begin civil wars in those countries with Mexico or Canada? The United States would have to take pretty unprecedented aggression against its neighbors, at least in the past 30 years, in order to even begin to have a conversation about what would it look like if another country were to come in and set up shop in some of these countries. Because the United States behavior towards the countries that neighbor it are nowhere near comparable to Russia behavior against countries like Moldova or countries like Georgia or countries like Ukraine.
And the reality is on that, Destiny, is that the United States doesn't do it with its neighbors. It's doing it halfway around the world in Russia's backyard. Things like that, like the war in Syria, like
That's not true. What U.S. troops were in Syria?
Of two democratically elected
what U.S. troops were in Syria?
U.S. troops were in Syria.
Wait, you said what U.S. troops are in Syria?
The U.S. didn't have ground forces in Syria.
There
was a small contingent of U.S. troops there. However,
no, it's roughly a third of the country. The country is under sanctions. Israel bombs it virtually every week.
That's not true. To be comparable to what Russia is doing, Russia has their entire military moving into breakaway states on Ukraine.
They have a base. They have a base on the Mediterranean there, and the Americans going back. They did not do that for years. It wasn't until Damascus was threatened by terrorist groups that were aligned with Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. That's what happened, and it's because, and you can read about it in the New York Times, one was called Operation Timber Sycamore, and the CIA and its allies were arming terrorist groups in an attempt to overthrow the government of Damascus.
Sure, we can talk about arming terrorist groups, and the United States almost certainly funneled weapons.
No, but then they
Syria.
went into the country and carpet-bombed cities, and now they occupy a third of the country, and it's still under
the United
sanctions.
States occupies a third of Syria right now?
Yes, roughly a third. Who do you think controls the oil in Syria?
I don't know today. I know it was ISIS for a while, and I know they're fighting. I'm pretty sure Turkey extended.
Forces and their Kurdish allies.
It is my the Kurds that Trump threw under the bus, right? The Trump geographical relationships, right?
Okay, I'm legitimately lost because I don't think you can tell a lie this big. Wait, the U.S. doesn't currently occupy 1/3 of Syria, do we? Did I miss some shit?
And yes, they're acting aggressively in Syria.
Dude.
You